I'm pretty sure everyone knows what a fad is, but for the sake of this video, let me properly define it. A fad is defined as an intense and widely shared enthusiasm for something. This enthusiasm is short-lived and without basis in the object's qualities. In simple terms, it's a craze over something, and that something can be just about anything. Fads exist in every type of media, and I guarantee that each and every one of you watching have experienced them in some way, shape, and form. Fads come and go at rapid but varying paces. To use some real-life examples, the following list of things have been categorized as fads throughout the years. Pokemon Virtual Pets, Pet Rocks, Fidget Spinners, Silly Bands, Heelys, a Harlem Shake, Crazy Frog, and Kendamas, the last of which I swear only became popular so middle schoolers could hit their classmate with their balls. Now, an important thing to note is that when a fad falls out of favor, that doesn't necessarily mean it completely disappears. On the contrary, it generally either falls back into obscurity while still slowly chugging on, or it still remains relatively popular, but doesn't see the popularity it once had. If a fad continues on for a decently long time, then it's technically categorized as a trend, which evolves over a longer term and can even bring about a permanent change to pop culture. In fact, several genres I'm going to be talking about are actually more considered trends than fads nowadays, but I'll be focusing more on the genre's phases where they were considered fads, and where they were at their strongest point. Pokemon is actually a great example of both. The series became extremely popular upon release in the US in the 90s, but after about a year or two, the popularity faded. Despite the fact that the series remained popular for years to come, the initial craze had subsided. Fads also tend to work in cycles, meaning that years down the line, the fad will likely be recycled and refreshed. This once again happened with Pokemon with the release of Pokemon Go, which had every kid that made fun of you for playing Pokemon in grade school partake in the popularity and talk to you like they didn't insult you for enjoying a video game for years. Pokemon Go banked heavily on 20-year-old nostalgia for a lot of people, and became extremely popular for around a month or two. So, with an understanding of what fads are and how they work, let's shift gears over to what these have to do with gaming. By far, the most popular types of fads in gaming are the game genres. Throughout the history of video games, genres have come and go like plagues. Once a genre picks up steam, it can easily become extremely popular, which results in several games of that genre being created within the period of popularity. This particular category actually showcases the important point of the fact that most fads don't generally disappear. They instead continue being created. As an example, despite the fact platformers fell out of popularity some time ago, at least according to game developers, they're still being made. They just don't have the notoriety something like battle royales have during this point in time. The question I want to pose though is, are gaming genre fads a good or a bad thing for the industry and consumer base as a whole? Well, in order to answer this, we can't just look at one side over the other. We must talk about both the pros and the cons in an attempt to look at this with objectivity instead of bias. Let's start with a positive of fads in general. Firstly, it's important to note that genre fads almost always come off of the success of a particular game or a group of games. For instance, the Battle Royale genre became widely known through the popularity of PUBG, which was then followed by and overtaken by Fortnite. Obviously, my example here is what's become the infamous Battle Royale genre. The success of Fortnite and PUBG led to many good and bad things within the game industry, with the most obvious one being an increase in popularity and awareness of the genre. The genre gaining popularity often is seen as a downside, but if we're looking at it objectively and by itself, it's not necessarily a negative of the fad. Oftentimes, genres that become a subject of fads are either relatively new or hadn't been very well known within the gaming scene. Team-based and hero-based shooters are a great example of just this. It's arguable that Team Fortress 2 was the game that really put the team shooter genre out there, as it saw relatively high success in its early days with its distinct classes. The means of its reach and success is something I've discussed in length in many other videos, so that's not what I'll be getting into today. However, it wasn't until the announcement and excitement that was Overwatch that team-based shooters with distinct characters really became popular. Being an offshoot of the team-based gameplay that was popularized by the likes of TF2, CS, and Halo, Overwatch became the game that pulled the hero/team shooter genre into the mainstream, resulting in several developers trying to follow suit with their own hero shooter games with varying degrees of success. When a genre gains a large reach, companies are bound to try and capitalize off of it by throwing their own hat into the ring that the trend created. With genres that have specific parameters reaching the height of popularity, this can lead to several games that likely wouldn't have existed without the fad. While there are several examples of this that ended up in failure, I'm instead going to use the biggest and most obvious example that, while I'm sure many people don't want me to mention, I'm basically obligated to if I'm talking about genre fads. Fortnite's Battle Royale mode was created simply because the genre began gaining serious notoriety among consumers. PUBG's success led Epic to create their own spin on the genre with the gameplay mechanics that Save the World had already created. With assets in an already created game, Epic threw their hat into the ring and ended up striking the biggest vein of gold the game industry has seen in recent years. Had the Battle Royale genre not become a fad with PUBG, then Fortnite would have just been known as that relatively obscured PvE building zombie game. Regardless of your thoughts on the game, Fortnite became a cultural icon that has influenced part of a generation, and has managed to innovate some amazing things for video games. Sure, if the BR genre didn't become so popular, we wouldn't have gotten the irritation that are Fortnite memes. But that means we also wouldn't have gotten worldwide live in-game events, a byproduct of the genre's popularity that other games are starting to implement, and an aspect that, in my opinion, is gladly welcome into video games. Additionally, hybrid games often come out of fads as well, which also leads to games that wouldn't have existed if the genre, in the midst of the fad, hadn't become as popular as it did. Both Apex and Tetris 99 are good examples of this, with Apex having combined the hero shooter and BR genre into one individually distinct game, and Tetris combining with itself. When developers put time and effort into games they create during a fad, it can lead to some innovation in its own right, and some seriously solid titles that wouldn't have existed if the genre didn't fall into the fad category. On the other hand, popularity comes with its downsides as well. With fame comes imitations, and not every company that capitalizes on a fad will make quality products. Remember Radical Heights? That sort of 80s themed battle royale game with bikes and game show themes? Yeah, probably not, because it was rushed out of development and launched into beta with an alpha build to try and capitalize on the fad and save the company. The game lasted about 3 months before being shut down along with the studio. The survival crafting fad was also subject to a massive amount of poorly made games that were specifically looking to capitalize on games such as Minecraft that saw immense success with the genre. In fact, in modern times, this is probably the genre fad with the most shovelware-type games, due to mobile gaming gaining traction and the fact that the genre wasn't the most difficult to develop a game around. Several bad and rushed games appearing in a short period of time leads to horrible market saturation, with companies constantly trying to follow fads and create the next big IP or game. Oftentimes we'll end up seeing an influx of the current now genre. The quality of the game doesn't matter in a market getting saturated. If consumers see games with the same genre premise, especially if there's little to define them individually gameplay-wise, they will become desensitized to the genre. Consumers begin to see the games being released in the fad genre as white noise, nothing more than what they've seen in the past few months. This means that it's possible for good games to be ignored due to the genre's market being saturated. The hero shooter genre definitely went through this event during the time Overwatch was released. Several games came out and were announced around the time the Overwatch hype was at its peak, resulting in several games being labeled for riding off the coattails of Blizzard's exciting new game, regardless of if it was or not. Because of this, people started to turn their eyes away from upcoming hero shooters, resulting in several of them not getting the sales numbers they needed, resulting in game and studio shutdowns. I'd say the most famous example of this is Gigantic. Despite launching before Overwatch was fully released, Gigantic never received a following enough to sustain its maintenance and development. Paired with its rough development, Gigantic was fully shut down 3 years after its launch, along with its studio, and became a forgotten mid-2010s shooter. Lawbreakers was also a victim of this, as it was a solid game, but the players had gotten tired of the amount of hero shooters that the industry was pumping out. Its failure resulted in the studio's second team-based shooter to be outright cancelled. With With the way the market has shifted for the developers to make money from their games, in-game microtransactions and other forms of monetization have become extremely common. If there's a way to try and squeeze out extra money from their product, they will implement it. Fads are generally seen as fantastic opportunities for companies to make money off of, and if they find a unique way to do it that generates sales, it will be milked dry. At first, the figurine fad was a neat, albeit obviously money-grubbing concept that had some cool ideas. However, due to the amount of figurine games that came out, such as the entire Skylander series, Disney Infinity, and LEGO Dimensions, consumers began to get very tired of the idea, which slowly led to less and less sales of the genre. Or subgenre? This one's actually awkward to categorize, but considering its unique nature, I will be counting it as its own genre. This is one of the few genres that has actually almost died, with only about 3 different variations still in active production. Those being Starlink, Nintendo Labo, and Amiibo functionality, the latter of which doesn't function like games during the peak of the fad, at least now. This Toys to Life fad that was dictated by platformers and beat-em-ups as the core game genres is one of the few fads I can confidently say was more bad than good due to the way its gimmick functioned. However, despite the fact that fads usually end up producing several poorly made games, it actually does something good with the games that are well made and gain popularity. Specifically, the games that define a genre end up setting the bar for the quality a game like it should be at. This in turn forces other developers to try and live up to the standards set by the other games if they really want to compete with the spotlight spot. Standards and expectations are things that players have, whether they want to admit it or not. Standards have to be set in order to make sure the products we are delivered are of good quality, and it's these standards that can and will determine the success of a game. Usually. Prodigal Heights failed due to the standards of both PUBG and Fortnite before it. The game released in an unfinished, buggy, unfun mess, not saying that PUBG wasn't, that didn't reach the standards and expectations of the players they were trying to target. Its most defining trait, that of a wacky game show theme, wasn't near enough to hold its already sinking ship afloat. On the other hand, Paladins, created by hi-rez, a studio notorious for chasing trends, actually properly utilized the standards players had for team-based hero shooters, and did manage to improve and move closer to the standards Blizzard had set with Overwatch. While yes, Paladins did create a battle royale game in the form of Realm Royale, which just confirms the fact that they developed for the fads, I want to specifically commend them for putting in the time and effort to legitimately try and improve the game. For a while, it seemed like Fortnite and Apex were fighting back and forth with each other, with Fortnite not so obviously taking beats from Apex upon its release by adding in core game features into subsequent seasons, such as the ability to revive teammates at stations littered throughout the map, while Apex took inspiration from their Battle Pass and community feedback to outright improve the functionality of the pass in later seasons. But the mention of Apex actually brings up my last point. When companies shift their developments to follow the trend, they have to pull the manpower and resources from somewhere, which can often result in the cancellation or production delay of other games. Apex Legends, while a very solid game, was clearly made to try and capitalize on the popularity of the Battle Royale genre. The game came out of the blue from the Titanfall developers, and since the game took place in the same universe, it caused many people to ask if there was any development being made on Titanfall 3. After the release of Apex, it was more or less confirmed that Titanfall 3 wasn't being worked on by Respawn, which of course led to the assumption that the success of Apex led to its cancellation. This ended up being mostly true, as instead, Titanfall 3 being outright cancelled, its development actually turned into Apex, which does make a ton of sense based on the game as a whole. However, it's pretty obvious that the trend following led to, at the very least, Titanfall 3's development being frozen. With companies in it for the money, who knows how many games have essentially been canned in favor of a fad. If you want a good idea, just go ask the Fortnite Save the World players. I'm sure they know a thing or two about the developers abandoning their game for the more popular option. As a quick recap, let's lay out the pros and cons of genre fads for you laymen out there. On the pro side, we have the increased popularity of the genre, the creation of good games that never would have been, genre hybrids being created, and game standards being heightened. On the con side, we have market saturation. Often several poor quality games, consumers being desensitized to the genre, monetization abuse, and potentially leading to delay or cancellation of other game productions. So, based on simply the amount of points made, you'd think I'd say that the genre fads are a bad thing, but I don't think giving it a concrete negative label is the proper route here. The question doesn't exactly come with a nice and neat black and white answer, because of the nature of the evidence and, of course, opinions existing. Each good and bad point has merit, and it would be unfair and inaccurate to say one trumps over the other. Gaming fads bring both bad and good things to the industry and market. For every revolutionary live in-game concert broadcast for every player to experience on separate servers, you always have a Fortnite dance meme to balance it out. Special thanks to my delirious death merchants Damp Volcano and GTY200, because you certainly have to be delirious to be my highest supporters. Also thanks to Pugs501 and As Is Light.